Stop lying to yourselves. The golden generation wasn't a generation of gaming legends. They were just victims of the biggest fraudulent conspiracy in gaming history. If you cry and rage over the difficulty of games like Elden Ring, you are nothing but coddled players. Here are the 30 hardest games on the Commodore 64 that are impossible to finish. Let's begin. Ghosts and Goblins. We start with the King of Suffering, where the hero dies in just 2 hits. The absolute hardest part here is the inability to adjust your jump path mid-air. Once you jump, you are locked into a rigid, hard-coded trajectory, making it practically impossible to dodge randomly spawning monsters. Robocop. The cyborg cop moves with a frustratingly slow and heavy clunkiness, completely unlike the movie. The fatal flaw here is the trap-turning issue. Robocop takes fractions of a second just to turn around, which enemies exploit to pin you from both sides and completely paralyze your movement. Green Beret. You are a soldier behind enemy lines, and your primary weapon is a tiny knife. The lethal challenge here is the complete lack of a safe attack distance. The knife's hitbox is incredibly short. If you miss by a single millimeter, the enemy touches you first, and you die instantly. Manic Miner. The iconic British platformer that plays like an engineering nightmare. The hardest part is the pixel-perfect timing. Jumping a single pixel too late or too early means instant death. There is absolutely zero room for error here. Set Willy. It features the same gameplay style as the previous title, but set in a massive mansion. The programming nightmare here is the endless death screen trap. When transitioning between rooms, you can walk straight into an enemy standing right on the edge, causing you to die and respawn on that exact pixel in a horrific infinite loop. Shadow of the Beast. A visual marvel that deceived players with its stunning graphics, but behind the beauty lies a rigid, dry combat system. The hardest aspect is the stiff combat. If you don't strike the enemy a split second before they touch you, they will stun-lock you and drain your entire health bar without giving you a chance to retaliate. Iridion. Insane speed that wrecks your nerves as you fly over massive dreadnoughts packed with tight obstacles. The real bottleneck is the final landing sequence. The game forces you to slow down and align perfectly with a narrow landing strip. The slightest error obliterates your ship and sends you back to the very start of the stage. Monty on the Run. Constant stress and anxiety in rooms flooded with moving platforms. The ultimate challenge is the absolute lack of safe zones. The entire screen is a chaotic mess of projectiles and monsters, leaving you without a single platform to pause for a second and map out your next move. Cybernoid. A space shooter puzzle game with a malicious design where your ship drifts due to inertia. The hardest part is managing starving resources. If you burn through your bombs too early, you will inevitably hit a later screen that is mathematically impossible to clear without that specific weapon, forcing you to commit suicide. Raid over Moscow. The difficulty here kicks in before the battle even starts. The legendary bottleneck is the heavy inertia inside the hangar. The ship drifts and smashes into the hangar's tight internal walls before you can even point its nose toward the exit, leaving most players unable to actually start the game. Cauldron. A witch flying on her broomstick, but landing controls in tight corridors are completely broken. The hardest part is the blind leaps of faith in the caves. The game demands long jumps downward into platforms completely off-screen, forcing you to rely purely on blind memorization. Cauldron 2. This time, you control a pumpkin that bounces and hops non-stop. The sadism here lies in the bounce physics and low ceilings. Bouncing under a low ceiling multiplies the pumpkin's recoil speed completely at random, launching it directly into ground spikes. Airwolf. A military helicopter built on a complex, single-joystick physics system. The hardest thing is overcompensation. When you get too close to a wall and pull the joystick the other way to stabilize, the chopper lunges violently in the opposite direction, smashing right into the facing wall. Spin dizzy. Controlling a spinning top from a tilted 3D isometric perspective. The fatal challenge is isometric disorientation. The controls are mapped diagonally, meaning pressing up moves you diagonally upright, constantly breaking your sense of direction until you slide off floating platforms with ease. Spelunker. The most fragile cave explorer in video game history. The hardest part is the microfall damage sensitivity. Even a drop barely higher than your own character becomes instantly lethal, turning simple movement down small slopes into a constant risk of death. Ninja Spirit, a lightning-fast ninja action game where survival is never guaranteed. The core bottleneck is the multi-directional enemy swarm. Enemies flood in from all edges of the screen, and the faster you move, the more the game overwhelms you with unavoidable attacks. The Last V8, a supercar racing through a hostile wasteland with absurd controls and zero forgiveness. The hardest part is the restricted forward visibility. The dashboard blocks half the screen, and obstacles appear so late that reaction time alone is never enough. You are forced into pure memorization of every turn. Cobra, a brutal action game inspired by the Stallone movie, dropping you into danger completely underpowered. The frustrating challenge is the sudden sniper ambush system. Enemies fire from windows and off-screen angles with almost no warning, and the stiff movement makes dodging nearly impossible. Army Moves, a punishing military action game built entirely on precision and trial and error. The hardest part is the impossible timing windows. Jumps, enemy fire, and environmental hazards are synced so tightly that a fraction of a second decides success or instant death. Booty, a pirate-themed platformer that removes one of the most basic survival tools. Jumping. The biggest problem is the ladder trap design. Enemies can corner you on narrow paths and ladders, leaving no escape options and forcing unavoidable deaths in tight spaces. China Miner, inspired by Manic Miner, but featuring a completely locked, rigid jump arc. The bottleneck here is the input lock. The second you press the jump button, you lose all control midair. You cannot slow down or push forward, leaving you to watch your character fall onto an enemy in pure. A space shooter that rains projectiles on screen while your weapons are completely underpowered. The pure sadism here is the total lack of invincibility frames. When your ship takes a hit, the game gives you no blinking grace period, meaning an enemy wave can completely wipe out all 5 of your lives in under a single second. The Human Race, a bizarre game where mechanics and rules completely reset with every evolutionary stage. The hardest part is the skill reset shock. The game abruptly alters button functions in every new level, leading to instant death as your muscle memory betrays you. Imhotep. Set in ancient Egypt, you start as a force scroller riding a giant bird. The technical bottleneck here is the bird's colossal hitbox. It takes up a massive portion of the screen, making it painfully easy for tiny enemy projectiles to strike you down. Chiller. A malicious British horror platformer where your health bar does not refill between stages. The hardest part is visual clutter and phantom platforms. The background artwork looks identical to actual ledge hitboxes, causing you to jump thinking you'll land on solid ground, only to plummet into the abyss. Rick Dangerous, an iconic classic inspired by Indiana Jones, built entirely on trap mechanics. The hardest part is the unfair, untelegraphed traps. Flat, normal-looking ground will suddenly sprout spikes with zero visual warning, punishing you for moving forward and forcing you to memorize your steps millimeter by millimeter. Delta, a side-scrolling space shooter featuring blistering fast enemy waves. The terrifying obstacle is the brutal death penalty. If you die, you respawn at that exact spot but stripped down to your weak, baseline weapon, making it mathematically impossible to break through the enemy's wall of fire again. Mayhem in Monsterland. It starts cute, bright, and colorful, looking like a Sonic competitor, only to suddenly pivot into a platforming nightmare. The hardest part is the slippery momentum and delayed friction. The character moves at extreme speeds, and when you try to stop on tiny platforms, you slide a few extra pixels, constantly throwing you into the spikes. Beachhead, a famous military action game where the late-game stages demand frantic control speeds. The borderline impossible challenge is the blind angle shooting. Stationary turrets fire at you from skewed, diagonal angles, forcing you to adjust your cannon's degrees with micro-precision. The slightest error turns you into an easy target for their shells. Creatures. Behind the cute, adorable cartoon graphics hides a punishingly tight level design. The ultimate shock here is a hard-coded swimming glitch. A programming error in the original game's code completely broke your shield physics underwater, leaving a single touch from any sea creature to kill you instantly, no matter how full your health bar is. And now, the challenge goes out to you in the comments. To the coddled gamers of today, do you think you could survive even a single minute here? And to the veteran gamers, confess, how many controllers did you smash because of this list? And how many of these games did you actually beat without cheat codes?